September 7th, 1940, 5 p.m., London. A German bomber pilot looks down from 18,000 feet and sees something he's never seen before. The River Thames reflecting flames. Not from one building, not from one neighborhood. The entire East End of London is burning. 348 German bombers, 617 fighter escorts, the largest aerial armada in human history at that time. Their mission? Break Britain's will to fight in a single afternoon. By midnight, 430 civilians would be dead, 1,600 seriously wounded. But something unexpected happened. Britain didn't break. They didn't even bend. This is the story of how a nation, abandoned by its allies, outgunned by the most powerful military machine ever created, decided that surrender wasn't an option, even when surrender was the only logical choice. To understand why Britain's survival mattered, you need to understand just how alone they were. May 1940. In just 6 weeks, Hitler's Wehrmacht had accomplished what Germany failed to do in 4 years during World War I. France had fallen. The Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg crushed. Norway and Denmark occupied. The British Expeditionary Force had been pushed into the sea at Dunkirk. Yes, 338,000 men were evacuated in 9 days, but they left behind every tank, every artillery piece, every vehicle. Britain's army came home alive, but it came home defenseless. By June 1940, Nazi Germany controlled Europe from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees, from the Atlantic coast to the borders of the Soviet Union. And Britain? Britain stood alone. Winston Churchill had become Prime Minister only weeks earlier, on May 10, 1940, the same day Germany invaded France. He inherited a military designed for empire policing, not continental warfare. He inherited an air force with fewer than 700 fighter aircraft. He inherited a population that had spent the 1930s desperately hoping to avoid another war. Many in Britain's government wanted to negotiate. Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, argued for a peace settlement. Why sacrifice Britain when the war was already lost? Hitler even offered generous terms. Keep your empire, keep your navy, just acknowledge German dominance in Europe. Churchill refused. On June 18, 1940, he stood before Parliament and delivered words that would define the next 12 months. What General Weygand called the Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. Hitler didn't expect it to take long. Operation Seelohe, Sea Lion, that was the code name for Hitler's invasion of Britain. The plan was ambitious but logical. Germany would launch 250,000 troops across the English Channel on the first day, with another 150,000 following within 3 days. Landing sites stretched from Folkestone to Brighton. Panzer divisions would race toward London while paratroopers seized key bridges and airfields. But there was one critical prerequisite: air superiority. The Kriegsmarine, Germany's navy, made this absolutely clear to Hitler. We cannot protect an invasion fleet if the Royal Air Force controls the skies. Our barges will be sitting ducks for British bombers. The invasion is impossible without air supremacy. So the task fell to Reichsmarschall Göring and his Luftwaffe. Göring was confident, arrogant even. Why wouldn't he be? His air force had swept aside every opponent it had faced. Poland fell in weeks. The Luftwaffe had terrorized Rotterdam into submission. In France, Stuka dive bombers had shattered defensive lines that were supposed to be impregnable. Göring promised Hitler he could destroy the Royal Air Force in 4 days, 4 weeks at most. The strategy was straightforward. Phase 1, destroy RAF Fighter Command's airfields in southern England, hit the radar stations, obliterate the aircraft on the ground. Phase 2, draw British fighters into the air and annihilate them. Germany had numerical superiority, 3,000 aircraft versus Britain's 1,900. More importantly, Germany had experience. Luftwaffe pilots had been fighting since 1936 in Spain. Many had 50, 100 combat missions.
Once air superiority was achieved, bomb British ports, factories, and communication centers until the government sued for peace. It was a plan that had worked everywhere else. The Luftwaffe's intelligence estimated that Britain had perhaps 300 operational fighters remaining after Dunkirk. The actual number was closer to 650, but even that wouldn't be enough, not against what was coming. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding commanded RAF Fighter Command from a headquarters in Bentley Priory, northwest of London. Dowding was not a popular man. He was cold, methodical, and famously difficult to work with. He didn't drink, he didn't socialize. His nickname among fellow officers was Stuffy. But Stuffy Dowding had spent the last 4 years preparing for exactly this moment. While other RAF commanders advocated for strategic bombers, big aircraft that could strike Germany, Dowding quietly built a defensive system unlike anything in the world. It started with radar. Britain's chain-home radar network consisted of 21 stations along the coast, each with steel towers reaching up to 350 feet. These stations could detect incoming aircraft up to 100 miles away. Not perfectly, not with precise numbers, but enough to give warning. Radar fed information to Fighter Command headquarters, where hundreds of personnel, mostly women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, plotted enemy positions on massive map tables using colored blocks. This information was then transmitted to sector stations, which scrambled fighters to intercept. It was the world's first integrated air defense system, and it worked. But systems don't win wars, people do. The pilots of Fighter Command were impossibly young. The average age was 20. Many had fewer than 10 hours of combat training. They came from everywhere: Britain, Poland, Czechoslovakia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, even a few Americans who had volunteered before America entered the war. They flew 2 aircraft types: the Hawker Hurricane, rugged, stable, easier to fly. It made up 60% of Fighter Command's strength. The Supermarine Spitfire, faster, more maneuverable, legendarily beautiful. Pilots loved it. Spitfires became the symbol of British resistance. Both were armed with 8.303 Browning machine guns. Both were designed for one purpose: kill German bombers before they could drop their loads on British cities. A fighter pilot's life expectancy during the Battle of Britain was 87 hours of combat flying time. Most didn't make it that long. Squadron leader Peter Townsend later described the routine. You'd wake up at dawn, scramble 2, 3, sometimes 6 times a day, land, refuel, rearm, scramble again, watch your friends die, and you'd do it again the next day and the next, until you died or broke or the war ended. By July 1940, Dowding had 58 squadrons, about 1,450 trained pilots. He would need every single one. July 10, 1940. Most historians mark this as the beginning of the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe started with probing attacks, bomb the convoys in the English Channel, test British response times, learn their tactics. German bomber formations, protected by Messerschmitt Bf 109s, attacked shipping and coastal targets. The RAF responded, and the air battles were fierce but inconclusive. Then, on August 13th, came Adeltag, Eagle Day. Göring launched the main offensive. The objective: destroy Fighter Command in 4 days. 1,485 German aircraft took off that day. They hit airfields across southern England: Detling, Eastchurch, Middlewallop. They struck radar stations, though they didn't realize how critical these targets were. The RAF responded with everything they had. That single day saw 74 German aircraft destroyed versus 34 British fighters. But here's what the numbers don't tell you. Britain lost 34 aircraft, Germany lost 74, but Britain only lost 13 pilots. Most were able to bail out over friendly territory. Germany lost 94 aircrew, many over the Channel or England, meaning they were dead or captured. This asymmetry mattered. Britain could replace aircraft faster than pilots. Every German crew lost was gone forever.
For 2 weeks, the Luftwaffe hammered RAF airfields relentlessly. August 15th, the largest air battle, 2,000 German sorties, attacks from Norway, Denmark, and France simultaneously. The Luftwaffe believed they were facing a broken, scattered force. They were wrong. British fighters rose to meet them everywhere. The Luftwaffe lost 75 aircraft that day. It was their worst single-day loss of the battle. But the RAF was bleeding too. By late August, Dowding faced a crisis. Not aircraft. Factories were producing more Spitfires and Hurricanes than were being lost. The crisis was pilots. Experienced squadron leaders were dead. New pilots were arriving at squadrons with 10 hours of flight time total, being thrown into combat the same day. Some didn't survive their first mission. Fighter Command was winning tactically, but losing strategically. If this continued, there would be no pilots left to fly the planes. German intelligence, however, told Göring that the RAF was finished, down to their last 100 fighters. One more push would break them. On August 30th and 31st, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids against Fighter Command's sector stations, the nerve centers that controlled defensive operations. Biggin Hill, Kenley, Hornchurch, Debden all hit hard. Some were knocked offline for days. Operations rooms destroyed. Communications severed. September 6th, 1940, Dowding held a conference with his commanders. The situation was desperate. Fighter Command had lost 295 fighters in 2 weeks, with 171 pilots dead and 128 wounded. Replacement pilots were arriving untrained. One more week of attacks on airfields, and Fighter Command might genuinely collapse. Then Hitler made a decision that changed everything. On August 24th, a group of German bombers got lost during a night raid. They were supposed to hit oil refineries outside London. Instead, they dropped their bombs on the east end of the city itself. It was an accident, a navigation error. Churchill responded immediately. The next night, he ordered Bomber Command to strike Berlin. The damage was minimal. Berlin's defenses were formidable, but the psychological impact was enormous.
Hitler had promised the German people that no enemy bomber would ever reach Berlin. Now, British bombs had fallen on the Reich capital. Hitler was furious. In a speech on September 4th, he screamed, "If they attack our cities, we will raze theirs to the ground." Göring saw an opportunity. His bomber crews were exhausted from low-level attacks on defended airfields. Losses were mounting. But bombing cities? That was easier. Fly high, drop bombs on a large target, go home. On September 7th, the Luftwaffe shifted strategy. They would terror-bomb London until Britain surrendered. That afternoon, 348 bombers, escorted by 617 fighters, appeared over London in a formation stretching 20 miles across. For 2 hours, they dropped bombs on the docks, warehouses, and residential areas of East London. At 8 p.m., a second wave arrived. 318 more bombers, this time in darkness. The fires were visible from 100 miles away. Firefighters fought blazes that consumed entire blocks. The London docks, the largest in the world, burned for 3 days straight. But something unexpected happened. Fighter Command's airfields weren't being bombed anymore. Radar stations could be repaired. Sector stations could regroup. Pilots could rest, even if just for a day. Dowding recognized it immediately. Germany had just given Britain a chance to survive. For the next 57 consecutive nights, German bombers attacked London. Then they expanded. Coventry, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, Belfast, any city with industry or ports. The Blitz killed 43,000 British civilians and destroyed more than 1 million homes. But it didn't break Britain's will. It hardened it. Imagine this. Every night at sunset, air raid sirens wail. You gather your children, your valuables, whatever you can carry, and you descend into the underground. By September 1940, 177,000 Londoners were sleeping in the tube every night.
Families claimed spots on platforms. Children did homework by candlelight. People from every social class, aristocrats, factory workers, immigrants, crammed together in the dark, listening to bombs fall above. The smell was overwhelming. Sweat, unwashed bodies, makeshift toilets. But community formed. People shared food. Strangers became friends. Musicians performed. Teachers held classes for children. Vera Lynn's voice on the radio singing "We'll Meet Again" became an anthem of survival. Above ground, the damage was catastrophic. Coventry Cathedral, one of Britain's architectural treasures, was destroyed on the night of November 14, 1940. The Luftwaffe dropped 500 tons of explosives and 30,000 incendiary bombs. The medieval city center was obliterated. The term "Coventrated" entered the German language, meaning to utterly destroy. But Coventry didn't surrender. The next morning, the king visited, Churchill visited, and the people began rebuilding. This was repeated in city after city. Liverpool suffered 681 bombing raids. The port kept operating. Glasgow was hit hard. Shipyards were prime targets. Workers kept building destroyers and corvettes.
The government propaganda machine worked overtime. Keep calm and carry on wasn't actually widely distributed during the war, but the sentiment was everywhere. Posters reminded citizens, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory." But it wasn't just propaganda. There was genuine defiance. When Buckingham Palace was bombed on September 13th, Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother, famously said, "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." Newspapers published photos of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth inspecting bomb damage in working-class neighborhoods. The monarchy, often seen as distant, suddenly felt present. And Churchill was everywhere, visiting bombed-out homes, standing in rubble, cigar clenched in his teeth, giving the V for victory sign. His speeches became legendary. On October 29th, he addressed the nation. "Death and sorrow will be our companions on our journey, hardship our garment, constancy and valor our only shield. We must be united, we must be undaunted, we must be inflexible." The British people were all of those things. September 15th, 1940. This day became known as Battle of Britain Day, the moment Germany's defeat became inevitable. Göring ordered a massive daylight raid on London. 2 waves. The first at midday, 200 bombers with heavy fighter escort. The second in the afternoon, another 150 bombers. The objective was the same: break British morale, destroy what remained of the RAF. Churchill was visiting Fighter Command headquarters that day, watching the plotting tables as German formations appeared over the channel. Every available squadron was scrambled. No reserves. Churchill turned to Air Vice Marshal Park and asked, "What other reserves have we?" Park replied, "There are none." Every single RAF fighter squadron in southeast England was in the air at that moment. Over London, one of the largest air battles in history unfolded. Hurricanes and Spitfires tore into German formations. Bombers scattered, fighters dogfought at 20,000 feet. The RAF claimed 185 German aircraft destroyed that day. The actual number was 56, but perception mattered more than reality. German bomber crews returned to France shaken. They reported massive British fighter presence, not the broken remnants they'd been promised. 2 days later, on September 17th, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The invasion would never come. Britain had survived. But the Blitz continued. The Luftwaffe would keep bombing British cities through May 1941, but the strategic objective, forcing Britain to surrender, was dead. Germany would now have to fight a 2-front war, because Britain's survival meant one critical thing. America had somewhere to base its forces when it eventually entered the war. Without Britain, there would have been no D-Day, no liberation of Europe from the West. The entire trajectory of World War II hinged on Britain's refusal to break during those desperate months. The numbers tell part of the story.
During the Battle of Britain, July 10th to October 31st, 1940, RAF Fighter Command had 1,542 aircrew killed, 544 aircraft destroyed. The Luftwaffe had 2,698 aircrew killed, 1,977 aircraft destroyed. During the Blitz, September 1940 to May 1941, British civilians killed were 43,000. Seriously injured were 139,000. Homes destroyed exceeded 1 million. But numbers don't capture resilience. They don't capture the mother who dug through rubble with her bare hands to find her child. They don't capture the firefighter who worked for 36 hours straight while his own home burned. They don't capture the factory worker who showed up to a bombed-out building and started production in the ruins. Churchill called them the few, the RAF pilots who stood between Britain and invasion. On August 20th, 1940, he told Parliament, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." But the few were really the many. The radar operators, the ground crews who rearmed fighters in minutes, the firefighters and ambulance drivers, the families who sheltered strangers, the children who collected scrap metal for the war effort. Britain didn't survive because of superior technology or strategy. Britain survived because an entire nation decided that freedom mattered more than safety. They were outgunned. They were isolated. Logic said they should negotiate. They fought anyway.
Hitler's failure to defeat Britain had consequences that rippled through the entire war. First, it destroyed the myth of German invincibility. For the first time, the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe had been stopped. Resistance movements across occupied Europe took heart. If Britain could stand, maybe others could too. Second, it kept a democratic foothold in Europe. When America entered the war in December 1941, Britain became the staging ground for the liberation of the continent. Without British airfields, the strategic bombing campaign against Germany would have been impossible. Without British ports, D-Day couldn't have happened. Third, it tied down German resources. The Luftwaffe kept hundreds of aircraft in Western Europe for defense, aircraft that could have been used against the Soviet Union in 1941. The Eastern Front might have gone very differently if Germany had another 2,000 aircraft available. Fourth, it validated the concept of strategic defense. Britain proved that a technologically sophisticated defensive system, radar, coordinated command and control, interior lines, could defeat a numerically superior attacker. And finally, it demonstrated that civilian morale could not be broken by bombing alone. The Luftwaffe dropped 37,000 tons of bombs on Britain during the Blitz. British industrial production increased during this period. War factory output went up. Civilian absenteeism remained low. The social fabric didn't collapse. This lesson would shape how both sides conducted strategic bombing for the rest of the war. Germany learned that terror bombing didn't work. The Allies learned it too, though they would try to prove otherwise over Hamburg, Dresden, and Tokyo. But in 1940 to 1941, Britain proved something more fundamental. Democracy, when tested, could be as ruthless and determined as any dictatorship. In June 1940, as France collapsed and Europe fell into darkness, Winston Churchill addressed the British people with words that would echo through history. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be free, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. This was their finest hour. Not because Britain won decisively, not because they suffered less than others, but because, when the entire weight of Nazi Germany pressed down on them, when logic and reason screamed surrender, when the easy choice was peace at any price, they said no. A 20-year-old pilot from New Zealand climbing into a Spitfire at dawn, knowing he probably wouldn't see sunset. A mother in Liverpool pulling her children from the rubble, then going to work at the munitions factory.
a radar operator in Dover tracking formations, knowing that German bombers were about to drop their loads on her city. These weren't superhuman heroes. They were ordinary people who, when faced with the extraordinary, decided that some things were worth dying for. Freedom was one of them. The lights stayed on in Britain, and because they did, the lights eventually came back on across all of Europe. Britain doubted them. Germany expected them to break. They didn't.